The knock came between thunderclaps, 3 hard, uneven strikes. Evelyn froze. No one visited this far up the coast. Another knock. Then silence. When she opened the door, the storm itself seemed to stagger in. A man, bloodied and barely upright, rain slicking his hair to his face. One gray eye searched hers before he collapsed against the frame. For a heartbeat, she almost let him drown right there. But grief makes mercy reckless. She dragged him inside. Towels, hot water. The smell of salt and blood filling her small kitchen. When she cut through his soaked shirt, old scars surfaced. Deep, deliberate, the kind only earned by violence. He muttered something. "Don't call anyone," before the fever took him under. Evelyn sat there, trembling, watching lightning paint his face in flashes. He looked less like a stranger and more like a consequence. The wind rattled the windows. The kettle hissed. The house listened. She told herself she'd send him away by morning. But the storm had other plans. A candle flickers near his hand, and we see the faint outline of a tattoo under his ribs. A coin split down the middle. Who is he? And why does danger follow him even when unconscious? Morning, the storm has passed. The world feels like it's holding its breath. Evelyn's home is quiet, except for the sound of the sea pressing against the shore. She moves like someone afraid to wake her own ghosts. The stranger still sleeps on her couch. His wound is cleaner now. He doesn't look dangerous, but she knows better than to trust what looks peaceful. Her house tells us who she is. A violin case in the corner, unopened. A photo of a brother on the mantel. Laughter frozen midsummer. A calendar with every day blank. She lives like time stopped the day he died. When the man finally stirs, his voice is low, rough. "How long have I been here?" "Since the storm," she says. He studies the room, then her. "You live alone?" "I prefer it." He gives a half smile, the kind that knows the taste of regret. No one really does. Later, she finds him standing by the window, watching the sea like it owes him an apology. "You should rest," she says. "Rest feels like waiting," he replies. Something about that line stays with her. That evening, while she cooks soup, he notices her violin. "You play?" "Not anymore," he nods almost tenderly. "That's a shame." The world needs more people who can turn pain into sound. She doesn't ask how he knows that. Outside, thunder rumbles far away. Inside, 2 silences begin to recognize each other. When he finally says his name, Lucien. She doesn't realize it's the name that once appeared in every headline she tried to forget. The rhythm of the days grows fragile. 2 people orbiting quiet routines. Until the past finds its way to her doorstep again. A black car stops on the coastal road. Lucien sees it first. His posture changes. A soldier hearing an old war drum. "Stay inside," he mutters, pulling the curtain closed. He checks the locks. "Every door, every window, who are they?" she asks. You don't want to know, but she does. And when he disappears upstairs, curiosity drags her toward his jacket. Inside the pocket, a gun. And a photograph, her brother. Her breath catches. Her knees almost give way. He finds her holding the photo when he returns. For the first time, he looks afraid. "Where did you get that?" "It was in your coat." "You shouldn't have touched it. You shouldn't have had it." The storm outside begins again, rain tapping like a warning. "What did you do to him?" she demands. He exhales, defeated. "Nothing I can undo." The world tilts. Mercy becomes betrayal. The man she saved is the reason her brother died. He doesn't defend himself. He only says quietly, "He saved me once." "I couldn't save him back." She points to the door. "Get out." "Evelyn, get out." He leaves without another word. The thunder swallows him whole. The storm has passed again. But the house feels heavier, like it remembers the shouting. Evelyn sits by the piano, her hands hovering above the keys, unable to play. The air smells of rain and betrayal. She can still see his face when she said "get out," the flicker of guilt, the quiet resignation. But the worst part isn't what he did. It's that he didn't deny it. She should hate him. She tries to. She tells herself he's gone, that she can return to her quiet life. But her chest feels strange, too loud, too alive. That night, she dreams of her brother again, not the tragedy this time, the laughter, the 2 of them running through puddles, her violin case knocking against her knee. And then the dream fractures. Lucien turns toward her in Daniel's place. When she wakes, she's still holding the pillow like a wound. Days blur. She cleans, cooks, pretends to move on. But everything in the house feels altered. The repaired shutters, the tools he used, the small dents where he sat. She finds his jacket still hanging by the door. Inside, no gun, no photo. Just a folded note. There are things you deserve to know. Stay away from the docks. The handwriting is precise, controlled. The kind of control that hides chaos. Her throat tightens. She whispers to the empty room, "Why does it still sound like care?" Later that evening, headlights crawl up the cliff road. Two men in black suits step out, polite smiles that don't reach their eyes. "Miss Hale? We're looking for someone." "You've come to the wrong place, maybe, or maybe not." Of them glances toward the porch, at the muddy footprints that haven't yet dried. She realizes too late. They're not just looking for him. They're looking for anyone who might have helped. Her pulse hammers. She lies, "I live alone." They study her a beat too long before leaving. When they drive away, she locks every door. That night, the rain returns and softer. Like it's trying to apologize. She whispers into the dark, "Lucien, what have you done to me?" The world begins to close in. By morning, rumors spread through town. Whispers of a man named Lucien Vale, the Underworld King, escaped from a failed truce. His name floods the radio, the papers, even the grocery clerk's nervous chatter. Evelyn listens, frozen, the name now too real to ignore. The police come next. Not the men in suits this time, real officers. They ask questions, they linger by the sea. They leave with polite warnings. When she's finally alone again, she sits at the piano and presses one key over and over until the sound becomes unbearable. Her reflection stares back, pale, hollow-eyed. "You let him in," she whispers. You let him in. She could go to the police. Tell them everything. But the note burns in her mind. Stay away from the docks. Curiosity, grief, and anger merge into something sharper. Resolve. That evening, she walks to town. The dock district sits abandoned, drowning in fog. Every step echoes like defiance. Then, voices. Low, familiar. She hides behind a rusted container. Lucien stands there, alive, facing two of his own men. The same suits who came to her house. His coat is torn, his stance steady. She's not part of this, he says. Everyone's part of this now, the man replies, drawing his gun. Her breath catches. Too loud. Lucien's head snaps toward her hiding spot. Evelyn, he hisses, what are you doing here? You told me to stay away, she fires back, voice trembling. So of course I came. A gunshot splits the night. Sparks scatter. One man falls. The other flees. Lucien grabs her arm. Move! They run through rain and alley shadows until they reach an abandoned church. He collapses against a pew, blood seeping through his sleeve. You're bleeding. Just another bad habit. She tears her scarf, wraps it around his arm. You lied to me. I told you enough to keep you safe. Safe? You brought hell to my door. I brought myself. Their eyes lock. The silence crackles. Outside, sirens wail, closer this time. Go, he says. If they find you here, I'm done running from storms. The police lights flood through stained glass, painting them in fractured color. He looks at her once. No plea, no defense. Just quiet surrender. He steps forward, drops his gun. The officers shout. Metal snaps around his wrists. Evelyn stays hidden, whispering his name into the echo. He doesn't look back. Morning, silence. The world feels hollow again, but it's not the same silence as before. This one aches with unfinished truth. 2 days later, there's another knock at her door. This time it's a woman, sharp eyes, long coat, calm voice. Miss Hale? I'm Inspector Mira Voss. May I come in? Evelyn lets her. The word inspector tastes like the past returning with manners. The woman opens a folder. Photographs, reports, and then a face. Daniel Hale. Lucien Vale wasn't lying to you, Mira says. Your brother's death wasn't an accident. Evelyn's heart stumbles. Mira continues. 3 years ago, your brother saved Lucien's life. Pulled him out of an ambush before the police arrived. He never knew who he saved, just that the man was bleeding and didn't deserve to die. Evelyn's hands shake. You're saying he came to you because of that night? Because he couldn't carry the debt anymore? Silence. The ocean outside hums like it's listening. He didn't come to hide, Mira adds. He came to confess. That evening, Evelyn opens the letter Mira gives her. The world whispered Lucien's name like a ghost story, but Evelyn no longer listened to it with fear. The storm had come and gone, and yet the sea outside her window still felt like it was waiting for her to say something it could carry away. She spent her days rebuilding, fixing the window he had repaired badly on purpose, teaching a small boy from town how to hold a violin bow, leaving the house door open so the wind could find its way through. Every small act felt like defiance, a refusal to drown in what had happened. And in that quiet defiance, she began to heal. The nightmares changed. They no longer ended with gunfire or sirens, but with the echo of a man's voice saying her name like a prayer he wasn't meant to speak. Then one morning, a letter arrived. No seal. No signature. Just her name written in handwriting she would know even in another lifetime. Inside a single line. Your brother would have been proud of you. No more. No less. She didn't cry this time. Instead, she smiled, softly, as though she finally understood that closure doesn't always arrive as an apology. Sometimes it comes as silence that no longer hurts. That night, she took out the violin Lucien had left her. It had been repaired. The strings new, the varnish shining faintly under candlelight. A small silver charm dangled from the neck, half a coin, the same symbol that once marked his chest. She held it to her heart, then began to play. The melody rose slowly, hesitant, trembling, and then bloomed into something vast and full. It wasn't a song of mourning anymore. It was a song of memory made kind. The sound carried through the open window, down to the sea, where the waves caught it and turned it into something endless. Months passed. When spring came, Evelyn traveled inland for the first time in years, to a place that smelled of iron and rain, a prison, gray and silent. The guards led her through long white halls until she saw him, Lucien, thinner, quieter, his hair shorter, but his eyes still the same storm gray that once frightened her and now only made her feel human again. They didn't speak at first. The air between them was heavy with everything they'd already said without words. Finally, he whispered, "You came." "I wasn't sure I should," she said. "I wasn't sure I deserved it." She smiled faintly. "Maybe we're both wrong." He looked down at his hands. No rings, no power left to hide behind. "I heard you've been playing again." "I play because silence got too heavy," she said. He nodded, the corner of his mouth almost turning upward. Daniel used to say that. At her brother's name, something inside her softened. She reached into her coat and placed a small object on the table, wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it carefully. The coin. "Whole again. I found the other half in my brother's violin," she said. "You carried one." He carried the other. Maybe they should finally be one thing. Lucien stared at it for a long moment, and when he looked up, his eyes were wet. "How do you forgive someone who took everything?" he asked quietly. Evelyn met his gaze without flinching. By realizing they didn't take everything. They left enough to begin again. The guard at the door called time. Lucien stood, the coin still in his hand. Their eyes met, not as guilt and forgiveness, but as two people who had survived the same storm and learned to live with the weather it left behind. When she walked out, rain began to fall, soft, silver, almost warm. She didn't open her umbrella. Rain no longer meant regret. It meant rebirth. Back home, Evelyn opened every window in the house. The air was salt and light, the sound of the tide rising like breath. She took her violin and walked to the porch where the sea waited quietly. Her bow touched the strings, a single note. Then another. The melody that once carried grief now shimmered with something brighter, a forgiveness that belonged to both of them. Somewhere far away, in a prison yard, Lucien stood under the same sky, the coin in his hand, listening to a sound he could not hear but could somehow feel, the sound of being forgiven. The sea moved softly, as if nodding in time. Evelyn closed her eyes. "Love doesn't always heal the way we wish it would," she whispered. "Sometimes it just teaches us how to live with the scars, and how to make them beautiful." The music rose again, gentle as a promise. And the storm, finally, was still, the seasons changed, winter softened into spring, and the ocean outside her window became something she no longer feared. Not a storm, not a memory, just motion. Evelyn's days fell into a rhythm, mornings with the sea breeze, afternoons teaching children how to find their first note, evenings where she would sit alone on the porch, violin in her lap, letting the light fade slow and kind. Her students often asked about the scar on her hand, a thin white line she didn't remember earning. She would smile and say, "It's where a storm once touched me." They'd laugh, not knowing how true it was. At night, when the tide was high, she still thought of Lucien, not as a wound, not as a myth, but as a man learning to be quiet. She wondered if he still carried that coin, if he still watched the rain without fear. She hoped he did. One evening, after a long class, she found an envelope waiting on her doorstep. No return address, no name, just her own, written in that same deliberate hand. Inside was a pressed white rose, and a single line, "Thank you for teaching me where mercy lives." She closed her eyes, smiled, and tucked the rose into her violin case. The message was enough. She didn't need to see him again to know that he had kept his promise, not to her, but to himself. That night, she played one last piece for the sea. Her music was slow, tender, full of quiet light. Every note rose and fell like breathing, not of pain, but of release. As she played, the wind caught her hair, the candle by her side flickered, and the sound seemed to stretch far beyond the shore. Somewhere in the distance, perhaps across the fields, perhaps only in her heart, she imagined another melody, a man sitting under gray sky, eyes closed, listening to the faint echo of her forgiveness. The song reached him anyway. It always would. When the final note faded, the world didn't feel empty. It felt whole. Evelyn lowered the bow, her hand trembling not from sadness but from peace. She whispered into the night, "Some storms don't come to destroy. They come to clear the air." The tide moved in and out. The stars blinked awake. And somewhere between the sound of waves and wind, a quiet truth lingered, that love, even broken and brief, can still leave the world softer than it was before. Evelyn stood at the water's edge, the hem of her dress brushing against the foam. Her violin case rested beside her feet. She didn't rush to open it. She simply breathed, letting the rhythm of the tide remind her that time was still moving, even when hearts hesitated. Behind her, the old house stood silent but alive, the shutters repaired, the lights warm, the kind of quiet that didn't accuse anymore. She thought of Lucien again, of the way he had looked at her that last day, not asking for mercy, not explaining himself, just accepting. It wasn't love that passed between them, not in the ordinary way. It was something rarer, understanding, the kind that doesn't need to be spoken because it already exists in the spaces between words. She picked up her violin. The wood was warm from the sun. She smiled at that. Once, it had been an instrument of grief. Now, it was something else. The first note rose and hung in the air, fragile but unafraid. Then another. And another. The melody unfolded like memory, sorrow giving way to grace. She closed her eyes as she played, and the world around her softened. The wind slowed. The sea hushed. The sky listened. Somewhere far away, perhaps behind stone walls and rusted gates, a man with gray eyes and a worn heart lifted his head. He couldn't hear her music, not really, but he felt it. The way you feel warmth through a closed window. He smiled once, faintly, and whispered her name. Evelyn's bow trembled on the final note. The sound lingered, a long exhale of peace. She lowered the violin and looked toward the horizon, where the sun slipped into gold and silver light. For the first time in years, she felt the stillness inside her match the calm outside. Maybe that was all forgiveness ever was, not forgetting the pain, but learning to live where it no longer ruled you, she whispered softly. Almost to herself, some storms never really end, but sometimes they change their weather. The sea shimmered, the breeze carried her words out across the water. Then she turned toward the house, the faintest smile on her lips, the kind of smile that only belongs to someone who has finally made peace with her own story. The door closed behind her. The tide rose once more, and the world kept moving. Gentler, lighter, as if it too had forgiven itself. That night the sky was clear. No clouds, no storm. Just an ocean of stars reflected on the dark water. Evelyn lay awake, listening to the rhythm of the waves. They no longer sounded like reminders. They sounded like breathing. In that stillness, she realized something simple. Nothing that ever mattered was truly gone. It only changed form. Love became memory, regret became understanding, and storms became stories. She turned toward the window. The moonlight touched the edge of her violin, glinting off the silver charm, the coin that had once been broken. Now it caught the light hole. She smiled, whispering into the quiet, "Thank you for finding my door." Then she closed her eyes, letting the sound of the sea finish the sentence she no longer needed to say aloud. Outside, the tide reached the rocks, then pulled back again and again, steady and endless. The world exhaled. And in that invisible line between them, between guilt and grace, past and forgiveness, the story rested, not ended, simply at rest, because some doors once opened by mercy never close again.